Congress, allow me to welcome to the stage Sam Rolland, our keynote speaker. Sam, we're looking forward to what you're going to bring, and we ask the team to just play in a short bio of Sam before you start. Thank you.
Sam Rolland is Director for Sub-Saharan Africa at the Economist Intelligence Corporate Network. He holds a master's degree in economy from Stellenbosch University and was also a master's exchange student at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. During this time, he focused on labor economics, European integration and networks, as well as e-business development. He further skilled himself through the Institute of Social Studies at Erasmus University in Rotterdam in the field of financial reform. Sam launched his career as research analyst at Bloomberg New Energy Finance. This was followed by a position at South Africa's National Treasury, where he was involved in modeling and forecasting as well as economic policy. He has worked as econometrician, columnist, contract lecturer, and also as senior economist at the International Air Transport Association in Geneva and Deloitte, South Africa. Sam is a well-known economic advisor, assisting executives in decision-making within the Southern African market environment. Congress, please welcome Mr. Sam Rolland.
Goeiemôre almal en ek wil sê dankie van 'n trotse maatie af. Ek weet ek is in Potch country so en dankie vir Graan SA en almal wat van julle van hier is om die geleentheid vir dankie vir julle vir die geleentheid om hierdie belangrike storie van die wêreldekonomie te deel met julle. When I was driving over here, I was listening to Statistics South Africa having released the GDP statistics for the end of 2022. And it was interesting because they looked at which sectors have grown since the pandemic and which sectors are larger since before the pandemic. So they compared 2022 with 2019. And of the 10 sectors that they reported, 6 of those are smaller than they were before the pandemic and 4 are larger. The bottom of that 6 is construction, which is about 20% smaller than it was before the pandemic. But can you guess which is the top sector which has grown the most since the pandemic? Any guesses? Agriculture, 25% larger than it was before the pandemic. And I think for that, we can all give ourselves a round of applause. I am from The Economist. You might know us from The Economist magazine, and you'll see on my slide, we have the sort of covered food security, and you'll see we are generally quite negative with how the environment is going, as you've seen from some of the magazine covers we have. Maar ons sit in hierdie jaar om voor 'n kruising in die wêreldekonomie en hierdie vir die volgende 5 of 10 jaar gaan ons baie volatility en onsekerheid sien. If we look to the South African budget, and that was released in February of last year, there was really only one thing that National Treasury was focusing on, and that was Eskom's debt. And government agreed to support Eskom to the tune of around 240 billion rand. Now that has come at the cost of everything else, just about. If we look at national health insurance, absolutely nothing mentioned there. If we look at the basic income grant, there was a little bit there, but that sort of came from the COVID-19 special relief of distress grant that they will eventually look to convert into basic income, but very little on anything else. And that shows you that this is a government with at the bottom of its options and with very little room to move. Now, we can call this a negative as much as we want, but actually I would like to believe that this is a significant opportunity, right? And part of the work we do in the Economist group is that we advise corporates and multinationals on the state of South Africa. And we say, as bad as the past decade has been, why give up now? We are, I believe, at the turning point of something special, and you'll hear me talk about it throughout the presentation today. But the challenge that government faces now is that debt has got to a level where it is unsustainable. We're looking at around 70% of GDP in the coming years. And there really isn't any room for government to move. This is going to limit government support. And we've seen examples of this in the past 2 years where the July 2021 riots, government has been very slow in reacting to this, and we're likely going to see this spread to other areas. Support has not been paid out for those businesses affected by the riots, especially small businesses. We're going to start to see this, and we're going to start to see more of this as more disruption occurs. Then AI driving new efficiencies and regulation must keep pace. And if you've been following the news, and you would have read about ChatGPT and how ChatGPT is going to change the world, and I know that many people keep asking it to write speeches for them. I didn't do that today. I've written this myself. But AI is going to be a game changer in the market. I spoke last night with Derek about self-driving tractors and automation, and we've already seen that. But where change is coming is in access to data, access to new technologies that can help improve efficiencies, can help widen margins and improve yields. And it extends all the way downstream. It extends into transport optimization. It extends into labor force planning. So offering something like labor support as a service to farmers is something we're going to start to see new. And the result of this is that regulation must keep pace. And you'll hear me talk about this at the end of the presentation. But the key thing is that change is changing, and we're moving into a quicker, faster-paced world than we ever have before. And as business, as farmers, you need to be aware of this, because ultimately you need to be the ones to drive how quickly change occurs. Of course, we need to focus on the global story, and we face 2023 facing a potential new Cold War. Now, going back to 2022, we always thought that 2022 was going to be the year economically, globally, that the world economy was going to recover. 2020 was unbelievably disastrous for the global economy. 2021, we bounced back, but we didn't really know where we were, what sectors had recovered, how employment had recovered. And now 2020, and so 2022 is going to be the year we sort of bounced back, but we hit February, and of course, Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, and that upset everything. And it wasn't just that. It wasn't just the war. We sort of found ourselves at a number of different challenges facing the economy. And you would have seen this in the cost of implements, of equipment. Inflation started to rise. Inflation rose in Europe. Inflation rose in the US. On top of that, we had China adopting its zero COVID policy, and you would have seen this had a disastrous impact on global supply chains. We used to track this, and it has sort of started to moderate, but at one point, shipping times were nearly double the amount of time that we saw from pre-COVID. And if you're looking to replace equipment and machinery, I sympathize with you at the amount of supply chain disruptions that you experience. And so the global economy is facing a number of challenges. The point in the Cold War I'd like to make is that as the war has gone on, and we initially thought that Russia would invade Ukraine and that would be it, and we would sort of have to live with the consequences for about 5 or so years. But it's gotten worse than that. It's become a war of attrition. We're sort of entering a phase where neither party really makes much progress, and this sort of stale war as we exit winter in Europe. And the challenge is that we run the risk of other parties getting involved. We've seen China make statements that Russia and China have no limits to their friendship. And China is going to support Russia as much as possible. The risk of this is that, well, the West and NATO takes notice of this and starts to ramp up its efforts, and we run the risk of more volatility in the market, more of the same of what we saw last year. It becomes maybe not as severe, but it becomes a lot longer. And then, of course, as we would have seen, and we've spoken about this a lot today already, is extreme weather driving disruptions. We know that it's a combination of drought and flooding that has been a major disruptor, and you'll see shortly that this is not going away. This is going to become the new normal. Just looking at how the world economy has begun to change, and 2023 has been the year that growth has started to slow down. As I said, we expected us to be fully in recovery mode, but we aren't. We've now slowed globally to 1.7%. US expected to only grow at around 0.2%. We initially expected, as the Economist, that Europe would enter into recession, and it appears that there might be a few quarters of recession, but largely it's going to be spared. But the Eurozone is forecast to grow at 0%. We've seen China bounce back extremely strongly, and it forced us to change our message quite significantly, and that we'd always said that China's zero-COVID policy was acting as a massive drag on growth and a major disruptive supply chains. They've since lifted the zero-COVID policy, and the rebound is happening faster than we could have anticipated, and we're expecting China to now grow at around 5.2%, and this is going to drastically reopen the East Asian market, and it's going to drastically improve the economic outlook for that East Asian region. However, oil and gas prices will remain high as long as the conflict rages, as well as prices for base metals. Even after inflation recedes, and we're expecting this to continue on for some time, but the risks of geopolitical tensions, the escalation of the war, debt, and I'm not touching on that today, but it is a major challenge. And then COVID-19 variants. We sort of understand and we believe that the worst of the sort of COVID-19 variants are past us. As we understand how viruses go, the COVID-19 variant typically becomes more transmissible but less dangerous. And so it's expected that this isn't going to be a major risk, but it is still there. And more importantly, the era of cheap financing for companies is over. If we look at just how funding for various startup industries has been, we've seen the US raise interest rates strongly, and they continue to raise interest rates. And South Africa has had to follow. The Reserve Bank has raised rates in track and in line with what the US has done. The downside to this is that other financing goes out the window, and I don't have the slide with me now, but agricultural, agri-tech financing had been roaring along prior to the start of last year, and since then, since the US has started to raise rates, money for agri-innovation and high-tech agri startups has started to slow. It is still quite high, and we're likely to expect that new technologies and new financing is not going to improve at the same rate as it has before. This is not alone seen in agriculture. Pharmaceuticals have also seen a major drop-off in financing, and it is going to become a more difficult time for new innovation. As I said, climate change has become a major challenge and a major disruptor, and we can see that black swan events or climate events are no longer uncommon. We've seen in South Africa multiple floods, and we know how KZN was affected. We look at East Africa, and the monsoon has failed, and they're expecting limited to no rainfall for the fourth consecutive year in a row. In southern Brazil and Argentina, coping with the drought, as well as the US and Europe. Europe had an unseasonably warm winter. And it just shows you that the world in which we operate, the agricultural world in which we operate, is now going to enter a new phase of massive uncertainty. And the effects are not only seen in production. If we just look at what was seen in KZN, with flooding in their province, much of that infrastructure has still not been rebuilt, and Durban Harbour is still reeling from the effects. It continues to impact on supply chains. It continues to impact on transport linkages. And you're going to continue to see this. And as an industry, you need to prepare for both changing seasons likely to increase the likelihood of food insecurity. And it's not just in South Africa. This is becoming a global problem. And we saw it towards the middle of last year with many countries banning food exports, banning fertilizer exports as a way to safeguard their own domestic food security measures. One other big challenge we're going to see is that on top of increased food insecurity, we run the risk of raising unemployment as rural areas are most affected and are the ones to close their businesses. And resilience is going to be the key message I want to deliver here today. As I've mentioned, this is a global problem and a global challenge we're facing. If we look at which countries rely most on Russian and Ukrainian supplying of fertilizers, and I spoke to Derek about this, and this has started to moderate, but you start to see that much of South America, much of Central Africa are majorly reliant on the supply of fertilizers. This obviously translates into food insecurity, and looking at how many people rely on Russia, Ukraine for their total Russian imports, again, Africa is one that is majorly at risk. And the big concern, I mentioned a new Cold War and the new raised tensions between Russia and China, China, and the rest of the world. The big challenge we face here is that, well, where does South Africa and where does Africa fit in? Much of the West has sort of condemned the Russian invasion and worked together to limit the damaging effects. Africa and South Africa has really been sort of on the fence as much as possible. I mean, while the rest of the world was condemning the war, we held training exercises in Simonstown and our naval bases, and it shows you that South Africa is weirdly opening up and cozying up to Russia. And the big worry here is that this is going to impact on our relationships with our major trading partners, our business relationships with the US and the EU. And we might start to find that financing becomes more challenging, that doing business becomes more challenging, and accessing equipment becomes more challenging. You would have seen just recently South Africa was grey-listed. We still don't quite understand what that means, but one of the experiences we've seen in chatting with our members is that, and this comes from a producer of bearings and equipment, earth-moving equipment, they said that they can no longer get stock of equipment given that the international suppliers are not willing to extend lines of credit, that the FNBs and the Standard Banks and the Nedbanks creditworthiness are no longer seen as valid in their eyes. And this is just an anecdotal story. I don't want to step on toes here, but it shows you that cost of doing business, cost of acquiring implements may become more expensive in the near future. Now, I talk about this, and I talk about how fertilizers have the global reliance on fertilizers has been a global problem, and how this is translated into a reliance on Russian and Ukraine wheat. The biggest challenge we face here is that if we look at sort of early warning hunger hotspots, these are a number of areas of high concern, and they listed according to a number of factors: conflict, displacement, dry conditions, economic shocks, floods, political instability, and unrest. And you can see that Central Africa is at most at risk. Now, food insecurity is something that that Central Africa and much of Africa is struggling with now. Now, why is that relevant? Well, when people are hungry, they vote with their feet. And if you look at the election cycle map on the right, you can see that a hungry population going to the polls this year and next year is a dangerous population. And we've already looked to see Kenya and Nigeria have just finished. Nigeria's just finished their elections, and it's been relatively okay. We expected more unrest, but we didn't see as much as we thought we would. But we all know 2024 is going to be a new year, and Ethiopia, Egypt, Algeria all going to the polls. Of course, we are too, and I'll get to that message shortly. But the major risk globally is that hungry population is an angry population, and an angry population votes with their feet, and usually they vote for the person who shouts the loudest. Of course, in South Africa, I think we all know which party that is. I'm not going to name names, but it's red and they wear berets. And obviously, a party that shouts the loudest is not always a party that is spending time on engaging with business, engaging with sectors. And we know in South Africa the historical legacy of agriculture is a sensitive one, and this is something that I urge you as a collective industry to take cognizance of, is a hungry population and a population that is angry, and it may not be from food insecurity. I know load shedding is something I'm not going to talk about today because I think we're angry enough already, but it is something that you need to take note of now, and to develop a concrete action plan for the coming years. Of course, We've already seen examples of what happens here and what happens when food insecurity and election cycles come together and merge. If we look at the case of Peru, sorry, I see this has been cut off on my screen, but it seems okay on the broader screens. Crop areas decreased 19% in the 11 months ending 2022. It was, as I'm sure many of you know, a combination of drought, high fertilizer prices, and political turmoil to blame. The result of which was widespread social unrest and disrupted supply chains. Now, if this sounds familiar, it's because it probably is. This is a picture of the recent riots in Peru, and picture on the right is, of course, the July 2021 riots, and it shows an example in South Africa of how easily something can take to the streets. We speak about this a lot, and we say that, in the post-pandemic world, and I spoke about how only 4 sectors have grown to above their pre-pandemic levels. It suggests a country that is struggling with unemployment, and an angry South Africa. We've already seen what it can do, and we can already see the devastation it has caused locally as well as in the eyes of the international community. Now, I was told that I always like to give a positive message, and we see the risk and we see the potential for where South Africa could go. But we aren't there yet, right? Are we? If we look at yields, if we look at production, and more encouraging, if I look at the saamwerking I see today, I can see that this is an industry that is on the front foot. It is maximizing and it is taking advantage of the situation dealt with you. COVID was not easy. Load shedding has not been easy. But 3 years of positive growth, of strong harvests, is something to be very proud of, and it's in this. It is one of these reasons why I don't believe that we will see a July 2021 leading up to the 2024 elections. I don't believe that at least food insecurity will be the match that sparks the whole fire. And I have to say, and I want to say congratulations to each and every one of you here for the contribution towards that. However, this isn't a pat on the back session, and I can't say that this is a sort of congratulations and we can, and you're all able to go home now. Food security is going to be a major driver of economic risk, and what we start to see, and we've started to see this globally, is I spoke about the rise of AI, but we are starting to see more of smart farming to increase yields. I read an interesting article about vertical farming and the use of efficiency gains to increase the yields while minimizing the amount of land needed. And on top of that, we're starting to see global environmental policy moving towards encouraging the use of less fertilizer. We've seen the European Green Plan. Canada has also implemented something where global environmental goals have pushed towards more sustainable and more environmental farming. I understand the risks and the unique South African experience, having spent my life working and understanding the unique challenges of the South African economy. And I know that we have our own ways and we have our own methods that allow us to succeed. But why I said this isn't a pat on the back session, and why I'd like to deliver a message of accelerate. I told you that change is changing. It's now up to every industry, and yourselves included. You need to take the lead, and as Derek said, where government fails, the people will lead. Sorry if I've paraphrased it wrong, but we now need to see an acceleration of the industry and a leading of the industry beyond just the agricultural ecosystem. We need to see an acceleration into smart technology, into AI, into advanced innovation, because it's now becoming an advanced technological discussion. And why I say that business and why I say that industry must take the lead. If we look at a couple of months ago when the government was looking and mulling over the raising of the energy threshold, and I think they raised it from 1 megawatt of self-generation to, I think it was 10, or it was perhaps 100, and then they completely removed the threshold altogether, and they did it within a matter of months. And it shows you a government, before I say that, and the result of which, and this comes from discussions with our members, is you've started to see a massive, massive, massive uptake in the building of own power plants, the Sibanye Stillwaters, the Implats, the Anglos are all building their own means of electricity generation. And that's the first step. The next step we're going to start to see is linking back to the grid. Cape Town has already done that and started that process. And what we've started to see in the electricity sector is that the market has taken the baton and they've run with it. And we're going to start to see that government is not going to be able to keep up. As technology evolves, as businesses come to the party and say, we found a way to make this work that does not cost government anything. And I spoke about debt earlier. It doesn't cost government anything, but you're seeing major, major economic gains. Government is not going to be able to stand in the way. And so my message is that the agricultural industry needs to look at this and needs to take the baton and accelerate and lead the story, lead the discussion, lead the story, and lead the collaboration between innovation, between technology. I understand that you are early adopters of technology, and that needs to continue, because ultimately this will allow the industry to dictate and move forward faster than government can keep up, and that is where your real success will lie. And ultimately, that is where food security will lie. And we've seen how challenging global countries are struggling to deal with this. And to end off my story is not being aware of the risks that food insecurity pose, and not just the risks of food insecurity, but the downstream linkages that go along with this will be to your own detriment. So I want to end off by saying thank you very much. It is an incredibly encouraging to see the agricultural statistics show how much the industry has grown and how much innovation exists in the market, and that we are not sitting with a food security problem is something we have you to think about, and that we have you to think about not having to deal with a number of other challenges economically. So thank you very much. Are there any questions? I'm going to pass back to Derek for questions.
Thank you very much, Sam. Congress, do we have any questions from the floor for Sam? Sam, if I may ask a question, to what extent do you see, if you look at the people sitting in this room today, there is absolutely no shortage of will to take the baton and to accelerate at a tremendous speed. This is our food. This is what we live for. This is just how we. What do the youngsters say? This is how we roll. That's what drives us. Is getting ahead, taking the thing and doing it, getting it done. To what extent do you believe regulation and government as such is going to stand in the way of us actually being able to achieve that?
It's a good question, and I think it is going to be on a case-by-case basis. But we're entering an unprecedented time as we build the sort of we've always spoken about the fourth industrial revolution, long back to my Treasury days, and this has picked up pace, and we've always I've been fortunate enough, or maybe unfortunate enough, to deal with government a lot in my life, and for the longest time, and this was under Mr. Zuma, under Finance Ministers Nene, under Gordhan, under the weekend minister, and Gigaba. We still dealt with, when we spoke to them, you talk about what needs to be done as business, and you still found that and government would say, well, hang on. We still don't know, ideologically or theoretically how we're going to do this. That was before. Now we are starting to see that the fact that government doesn't have the fiscal space to do it, they need to allocate their money as best possible. Right now it was Eskom, and the hope is that we do not get to a point where they have to allocate to drought relief for some time. But if business and if industry can drive it forward, there isn't a way for government to stand still or to hinder progress, because they'll already be 4 steps back by the time you are innovating. I had the fortunate enough to speak at a tourism discussion last week. And Tourism SA said, well, we do what we want. We do what we want, and we engage with the Department of Tourism. Now, I'm not suggesting do that now, because it's completely different industries, but it shows you that business, the more you accelerate, the limited ability government has to step in the way of regulation. And we know how fond businesses are of private-public partnerships. If you can show success there, they are likely to be much more willing to accept the adoption of technology and the take-up.
I think on a business view, yes, but just the nature, the historic sensitivity around agriculture, around land, around those types of things, is that not a huge impediment? Are they not going to fight to the death to gain control or to influence that environment, to the detriment of growth in the industry?
I think maybe this it's a great question, and it's a point I wanted to raise in my presentation. Is it isn't just the responsibility of industry to take up the baton going forward. You also need to be cognizant of the historical challenge that exists in the agriculture industry. And we look at COVID, and we saw how many businesses had shuttered across the economy. COVID was one of those things that didn't discriminate in which businesses it closed. It closed, whether irrespective of which population group you belong to. And many businesses did not recover after that. We still see businesses that have not reopened. And so at the same time as that it's the responsibility to drive the conversation forward, it also is the responsibility to drive thinking and innovation around how do you build resilience into the market, right? As I mentioned earlier, when we investigated the impact of support packages to affected businesses as a result of the riots, the government had said, well, they hadn't actually started paying out businesses yet. This was a couple of months ago, maybe middle of last year. And so, how do you rely on government to build that resilience in? And for me, it is the responsibility of industry to think of ways to build resilience in supporting businesses that are not just going to be a sort of one and done type of business. It needs to be an established legacy business, and on top of that, it's also expanding the thinking to say, well, how are we then thinking of incorporating advanced technology? How are we sharing data? How are we working together so that our workforce is ready for the next technological innovations that are going to come around, whether it's on the farm level or whether it is downstream industries that are preparing for the next phase of technological innovation.
Thank you very much, Sam. Any other questions from the floor? Congress, if I can summarize what I'm hearing Sam's telling us, that now, more than ever, we need to understand and to grow and expand our industry forums, our industry networks, the relationships, the key strategic relationships that we're talking about. And like you saw in the refreshing of our mission statement, you know, together we are stronger than on our own. And the only way that I see the future is by us as an industry, and that means the entire supply chain is to take up the baton and to run with it. Sam, I thank you very much.
Thank you.